Pacific Coast, 4 o'clock a.m. Massive cargo ships drift silently through the morning fog off California. Their hulls carry more than containers. Hidden beneath civilian shipping manifests are modular military bases, advanced communication systems, and thousands of personnel ready to establish the first foothold. The target? The United States of America. But how did we get here? The trigger is economic collapse. A perfect storm hits America, hyperinflation spirals out of control, the dollar loses reserve currency status, and social unrest tears through major cities. Infrastructure crumbles. The federal government struggles to maintain basic services. Into this chaos steps China, not with tanks and bombs, but with a different kind of invasion entirely. They call it humanitarian assistance. The world calls it the most sophisticated colonization attempt in modern history. But this isn't your grandfather's colonialism. No gunboat diplomacy or territorial conquest. This is economic colonization backed by technological dominance and military deterrence. China doesn't need to occupy every state. It just needs to control the critical infrastructure, the ports, the power grid, and the financial system. Control the lifelines, control the nation. The Chinese playbook is methodical. First comes the economic lifeline. As American banks fail and credit markets freeze, Chinese state banks offer emergency loans to struggling states. California, drowning in debt, accepts a 50-year infrastructure development deal. New York, facing power grid failures, welcomes Chinese energy companies. Texas, with its massive ports, signs over terminal management to Chinese logistics firms. Each deal comes with strings attached: Chinese security forces to protect Chinese assets, Chinese courts to arbitrate Chinese business disputes, Chinese law in Chinese economic zones. Phase 1 unfolds over 6 months. Chinese civilian contractors flood into major ports: Los Angeles, Long Beach, Seattle, New York, and Houston become staging grounds. These aren't just workers, they're engineers, technicians, cyber specialists, and logistics experts. They rebuild crumbling infrastructure with breathtaking efficiency, but every system they install runs on Chinese hardware, Chinese software, and Chinese oversight protocols. The genius is in the approach. Americans see jobs returning, infrastructure improving, and basic services restored. Chinese firms hire locally, offering wages higher than Americans have seen in years. Small towns across the Midwest welcome Chinese agricultural investment. Mining communities in Appalachia celebrate Chinese rare earth extraction projects. The narrative isn't invasion, it's revival. China positions itself as America's economic savior. But the real transformation happens behind the scenes. Every port crane connected to Chinese networks. Every power plant integrated with Chinese grid management systems. Every data center running Chinese cloud infrastructure. Slowly, invisibly, critical American systems become dependent on Chinese technology and Chinese approval to function. Phase 2 is where the colonization becomes undeniable. Chinese special economic zones expand beyond ports. These zones operate under Chinese law, with Chinese security, Chinese courts, and Chinese governance structures. American workers commute into these zones for jobs, but once inside, they're subject to Chinese rules. No labor unions. No protest rights. No American legal protections. The zones multiply rapidly. Detroit becomes a massive Chinese manufacturing hub. Phoenix hosts Chinese solar panel production. Charleston manages Chinese shipping networks throughout the Southeast. Each zone functions as a Chinese city-state within American territory, complete with Chinese schools, Chinese hospitals, and Chinese police forces to maintain order. Here's where things get complex, and if you're finding this scenario as fascinating as I am, make sure to subscribe to the channel. We dive deep into these alternative history scenarios every week, exploring not just what could happen, but how global power dynamics actually work in the real world. American resistance begins to organize. Some states reject Chinese deals outright. Florida's governor refuses Chinese port management. Montana bans Chinese mining operations. Wyoming blocks Chinese energy investments. But these holdout states face a harsh reality. Their Chinese-controlled neighbors have functioning infrastructure, steady employment, and economic growth. The holdout states have rolling blackouts, crumbling roads, and mass unemployment. The federal government finds itself in an impossible position. Technically, Chinese operations remain legal under existing trade agreements. Chinese firms follow American business law, pay American taxes, and employ American workers, but the cumulative effect is undeniable. Critical American infrastructure now depends on Chinese approval to operate. Washington attempts. Pushback. Congress passes legislation limiting Chinese investment. The president threatens. Sanctions. Federal agencies investigate Chinese operations for security violations. But China holds the leverage. A single coordinated shutdown of Chinese-controlled infrastructure would collapse the American economy overnight. No power in major cities. No cargo movement through major ports. No internet connectivity for businesses dependent on Chinese cloud services. The Chinese response is calculated. They don't threaten military action. They don't need to. Instead, they offer a simple choice: accept expanded Chinese governance in exchange for continued economic stability, or face systematic infrastructure shutdown and economic collapse. It's colonization through dependency, not conquest. Phase 3 reveals the true scope of Chinese strategy. This isn't just about America. It's about reshaping the global order entirely. Chinese-controlled American ports now serve as hubs for Chinese trade throughout the Western Hemisphere. Chinese-managed American manufacturing produces goods for Chinese global supply chains. Chinese-operated American data centers process information for Chinese digital platforms worldwide. Europe watches in horror. NATO debates intervention, but what would they intervene against? Chinese operations in America remain technically legal under international law. European leaders face their own Chinese economic dependencies. German auto manufacturers rely on Chinese batteries. French energy companies use Chinese solar technology. British financial institutions depend on Chinese investment capital. The resistance movement grows. But it faces fundamental challenges. How do you fight an occupation that provides jobs, infrastructure, and economic stability? How do you rally Americans against Chinese governance when Chinese-controlled areas have better schools, cleaner streets, and lower crime rates than American-controlled regions? Some Americans adapt to the new reality. They learn Mandarin, embrace Chinese business culture, and prosper within Chinese economic zones. These collaborators aren't motivated by ideology, but by pragmatism. They have families to feed, mortgages to pay, and retirement savings to protect. Chinese governance offers stability that American institutions no longer provide, but others resist. Underground networks emerge to maintain American cultural identity. Small towns declare themselves American preservation zones, rejecting all Chinese investment and assistance. They struggle with outdated infrastructure and limited economic opportunities, but they maintain American laws, American schools, and American governance structures. The military dimension remains complex. China never invades America militarily, but Chinese naval vessels patrol American waters to protect Chinese economic interests. Chinese air defense systems in economic zones monitor American airspace for security threats. Chinese cyber capabilities can disable American military communications if needed. American military leaders face a strategic nightmare. How do you defend against colonization from within? How do you protect American sovereignty when Chinese infrastructure supports American military bases? How do you plan operations when Chinese cyber capabilities can monitor American military networks in real time? The timeline becomes critical. Years 1 through 3 establish Chinese economic dependency. Years 4 through 7 expand Chinese governance zones. Years 8 through 10 complete the transformation. America doesn't disappear, but it becomes something entirely different. A confederation of Chinese-managed economic zones interspersed with struggling American holdout regions. The global implications are staggering. The dollar's collapse as reserve currency accelerates Chinese financial dominance worldwide. American military bases overseas lose funding and strategic purpose. NATO fragments as European nations pursue individual accommodations with China. The American century ends not with military defeat, but with economic obsolescence. And here's the thing about scenarios like this, they're not just thought experiments. They help us understand how power actually shifts in the modern world. If you want to explore more of these complex geopolitical scenarios, hit that subscribe button. We're building a community of people who think seriously about how the world really works. So what does success look like for China in this scenario? Complete colonization isn't the goal. China doesn't want to govern 330 million Americans directly. Instead, it wants strategic control over American resources, infrastructure, and economic output while maintaining plausible deniability about territorial conquest. The endgame isn't a Chinese flag flying over the White House. It's Chinese governors managing American cities, Chinese courts handling American business disputes, and Chinese military forces protecting Chinese assets on American soil. America continues to exist, but as a collection of Chinese protectorates rather than an independent nation. For Americans, the choice becomes stark: embrace Chinese governance and enjoy economic prosperity, or maintain American independence and accept economic decline. Different regions make different choices, creating a patchwork nation of Chinese zones and American holdouts. The resistance never dies completely. American cultural identity persists in rural communities, small towns, and underground networks. They preserve American history, American values, and American dreams for future generations, but they lack the economic and technological resources to challenge Chinese dominance effectively. The psychological dimension proves crucial. Many Americans never accept Chinese governance, but they adapt to it pragmatically. They work in Chinese-controlled factories, live in Chinese-managed cities, and send their children to Chinese-funded schools while privately maintaining American identity and values. The timeline stretches beyond decades into generations. Young Americans grow up in Chinese-managed cities, learn Mandarin alongside English, and navigate both American and Chinese cultural expectations. They don't experience Chinese rule as foreign occupation, but as normal governance. This generational shift completes the colonization process more effectively than any military conquest. Global reaction varies dramatically. Some nations see Chinese success in America as proof that the Chinese model offers superior governance. Others view it as an existential threat to national sovereignty worldwide. The world splits between nations accepting Chinese economic integration and those desperately trying to maintain independence. The ultimate question isn't whether China could colonize America, but whether American institutions and American culture could survive the attempt. History suggests that successful colonization requires not just economic control, but cultural transformation. China's challenge isn't conquering American territory, but converting American minds. In the end, this scenario reveals something fundamental about modern power. Military might matters less than economic dependency. Cultural identity proves more resilient than political sovereignty. And sometimes the most effective invasion is the one that looks like a rescue mission. The realistic outcome isn't Chinese tanks in Washington, but Chinese managers in city halls across America. Not Chinese soldiers patrolling American streets, but Chinese algorithms controlling American infrastructure. Not Chinese flags replacing American ones, but Chinese governance making American governance irrelevant, which leaves us with the ultimate question in a world where economic dependency can reshape nations without firing a shot. How do countries maintain sovereignty? And more importantly, what does independence even mean when your economy, your infrastructure, and your future depend on decisions made thousands of miles away? The answer might determine not just America's fate, but the future of national sovereignty in the 21st century.